A simple clay jar might be a 2,000-year-old battery. This video will give you a new lens to see human history, one where ancient innovators may have grasped a force we think of as modern. We are exploring the Baghdad Battery, artifacts that could rewrite the story of technological progress. What were these jars really for, and why has their purpose remained a secret for so long? What does it say about us if an ancient civilization understood electricity long before we did? By the end, you will understand the full scope of this historical mystery and decide for yourself where the truth lies. What forgotten knowledge do you think is still buried beneath our feet? The story of these jars begins not in a laboratory, but in the dust of an ancient crossroads. To truly grasp what they might represent, we must place them back into their own world, a world far removed from our own yet astonishingly advanced in its own right. These artifacts were found in what is now Iraq, a land often called the Cradle of Civilization. They date to a period historians call the Parthian or Sasanian era, a span of nearly 900 years that saw empires rise and fall, from roughly 250 years before the Common Era to 650 years into it. This was not a dark age of stagnation, it was an age of brilliant exchange. Great cities like Ctesiphon thrived as melting pots of culture, where Greek, Persian, Indian, and later Roman ideas flowed along bustling trade routes. Think of it as the ancient world's internet, a network of caravans and ships carrying not just silk and spices, but concepts, recipes for glass, formulas for metal alloys, and techniques for creating vibrant pottery glazes. The artisans and scholars of this time were master chemists and metallurgists. They knew how to extract color from minerals, how to gild objects with thin layers of precious metal, and how to work with materials we still find challenging today. This is the crucial backdrop, a society with deep, hands-on knowledge of chemical reactions and conductive metals provides the perfect workshop for an accidental, or perhaps even intentional, discovery. The conditions were all there: advanced material science, a culture of practical experimentation, and a constant influx of new ideas from across the known world. It is within this vibrant, intellectually fertile ground that a humble clay jar, filled with a simple solution and an iron rod, could transform from a storage vessel into something far more mysterious. In 1936, a curator's routine examination would ignite a controversy that still burns today. Wilhelm König, a German archaeologist working at the Iraq Museum, was sorting through artifacts recovered from a village site near Baghdad. The collection held the usual relics of daily life, pottery fragments, simple tools, items that told a quiet story of the past. But then his attention settled on a group of objects that did not fit the narrative. They were small terracotta jars, each roughly the size of a man's fist, standing about 13 centimeters tall. They were unassuming at first glance, yet their interiors held a carefully arranged secret. Inside each jar was a rolled copper cylinder, and suspended within that cylinder was a solid iron rod. The assembly was sealed at the top with a layer of asphalt, a natural tar that acted as both a stopper and an insulator. To König, a man familiar with the emerging science of electricity, the arrangement was eerily familiar. It looked exactly like the basic components of a galvanic cell, a simple battery. In a paper published in 1938, he made a startling proposal. These were not storage jars for scrolls or sacred oils. He suggested they were ancient batteries, purpose-built devices for generating a small electrical charge. The artifacts were reportedly found alongside other objects dated to the Parthian period, placing them in that vibrant crossroads of ancient innovation we just explored. However, the precise archaeological records from their excavation were not as detailed as modern standards would demand, which has led to ongoing debate about their exact origin and context. This lack of a perfectly clear provenance only deepened the mystery. In that moment, a simple clay jar ceased to be just a museum piece. It became a key, one that seemed to unlock a door to a forgotten chapter of human knowledge. König's identification opened a Pandora's box of questions that archaeologists, engineers, and historians are still trying to answer. If he was right, what were these batteries actually used for? The physical design of these jars reveals an intention that goes far beyond simple storage. To understand why, we need to look at each component not as an ancient curiosity, but as a functional part of a possible machine. The jar itself is a humble clay vessel, hand-thrown and fired. Clay is an insulator, meaning it does not conduct electricity, making it a perfect natural container for this assembly. Inside, the first key element is a carefully rolled sheet of copper, formed into a cylinder. This cylinder sits snugly against the inner wall of the jar. At the top, a thick plug of asphalt, a tar-like substance, seals the cylinder in place and creates a watertight lid. Now, through the center of this asphalt plug, a solid iron rod is suspended. It hangs down directly inside the copper cylinder, but here is the critical detail: it does not touch the copper walls. It is isolated, held purely by the insulating asphalt. This creates two distinct electrodes separated by a small gap. Finally, researchers found traces inside some of the jars, a crusty residue indicative of an acidic corrosion. This suggests the jars were once filled with an electrolyte, a liquid that can conduct electricity, something common in that era like vinegar, fermented grape juice, or even lemon juice. When you assemble these parts, you have a complete chemical circuit. The copper and iron are dissimilar metals. The acidic liquid is the electrolyte that allows a chemical reaction between them. This reaction would cause electrons to flow from one metal to the other through an external connection, generating a small but measurable electric current. This is not a theoretical guess. It is the exact same principle Alessandro Volta used to invent the first modern battery in the year 1800. The ancient jar, in its elegant simplicity, appears to be a 2,000-year-old blueprint for the same fundamental discovery. That elegant blueprint of clay, copper, and iron only comes to life with one final, vital ingredient. The magic, if we can call it that, happens when the jar is filled. Pour in an acidic liquid like vinegar, lemon juice, or even a simple wine, and the inert assembly transforms into a functioning electrochemical cell. The science is straightforward but profound. The iron rod, acting as what we call the anode, begins to slowly oxidize in the acidic environment. This chemical process causes it to release tiny, negatively charged particles called electrons. Those electrons have a natural desire to travel to the other metal, the copper cylinder, which acts as the cathode. The acidic fluid, known as an electrolyte, provides a path for charged particles called ions to move, which completes the internal circuit and allows that flow of electrons to happen. If you were to connect the iron rod and the copper cylinder with a simple wire on the outside, you would create a complete loop. A small but steady trickle of electricity would flow through that wire. Modern replicas have proven this beyond doubt, generating a modest voltage, somewhere between 0.5 volt and 2 volts. Now, to our modern eyes, that seems almost laughably small. You could not light a single modern light bulb with it. But voltage is not the whole story. It is the presence of the current itself that matters. This is not a theoretical possibility born of coincidence. The specific choice of metals, their deliberate isolation from one another by an insulating plug, and the evidence of acidic residue all point toward an understanding of the effect. The design is too perfectly aligned with the function to be an accident. So if these jars could indeed produce electricity, the inevitable, thrilling question becomes, what on earth did someone 2,000 years ago do with it? The sophistication of the design is where coincidence begins to strain against credulity. An accidental discovery of electricity is one thing. A simple piece of metal left in acidic wine might produce a faint, unnoticed tingle. But to then encase that reaction in a purpose-built vessel is something else entirely. This brings us to the second, and perhaps most compelling, principle in this mystery, the question of intentional design. Was this assembly a happy accident of ancient storage, or was it a deliberate invention? Those who argue for the battery theory point to features that seem meticulously engineered for a specific function. First, there is the asphalt plug. This is not just a lid, it is a sophisticated insulator. Asphalt, or bitumen, is a naturally occurring tar that does not conduct electricity. By sealing the top with this material and using it to hold the iron rod perfectly in place, the ancient maker ensured the two metals would never touch inside the jar. This prevents a short circuit, a direct connection that would stop the flow of current. It is a detail that serves no purpose if the jar was merely holding a scroll or a bit of perfume, but it is absolutely critical for maintaining a sustained electrical potential between the two electrodes. Then consider the metal pairing itself. Iron and copper are a classic galvanic couple. When placed in an electrolyte, they generate a more reliable and noticeable voltage than many other metal combinations available at the time. The choice feels targeted. Why not use a bronze rod or a lead cylinder? The selection of these particular materials hints at an empirical understanding, a knowledge gained through experimentation that certain metals together in certain fluids produced a desired effect. Finally, these were not one-off curiosities. The jars were found as a group, a small collection of nearly identical objects. This pattern of replication is the hallmark of a working design, a recipe that was followed more than once because it yielded a consistent result. A single strange jar might be a fluke, but several built to the same precise specifications suggest a technology, however humble its scale. This principle of intentionality is what transforms the object from an archaeological oddity into a potential keyhole, a tiny window through which we might glimpse the focused mind of an ancient experimenter, someone who wasn't just storing things, but was actively trying to harness a subtle and invisible force. That question of intentional design leads us directly to the most fascinating puzzle of all. If these jars were indeed batteries, what were they powering? What practical, tangible effect could a trickle of 1 or 2 volts have had in the ancient world? The answers, it turns out, are both ingenious and surprisingly plausible, forcing us to reimagine familiar scenes from history with a hidden layer of technology. One of the strongest and most cited theories is electroplating. We know for a fact that artisans of the Parthian and Sasanian eras were masters of gilding, applying stunningly thin layers of gold or silver onto statues, jewelry, and ceremonial objects. The traditional method involves using a mercury-based amalgam, a dangerous and toxic process, but a small electrical current offers a cleaner, more controlled alternative. By placing a base metal object into a solution containing gold particles and connecting it to the battery, the current could coax the gold to slowly bond to the surface, creating a smooth, even, and durable coating. A single jar produces a very weak current, but connecting several of them together in what's called a series would multiply the voltage, creating a power source strong enough for such delicate work. Imagine an ancient workshop, not with roaring forges, but with quiet rows of these clay jars, silently facilitating the craft of creating objects that appeared to be made of solid gold. Another compelling idea points toward the realm of wellness and ritual. The mild, tingling sensation produced by the jars is well documented. Some historians have suggested a medicinal or therapeutic use, an early form of electrotherapy. In a world without modern pain relief, a gentle, numbing shock applied to sore muscles or aching joints might have been considered a form of magic or divine intervention. This application could easily blend into the spiritual. A priest in a dim temple, using the concealed current to make a metal statue seem to come alive with a mysterious vibration, would create a powerful experience for a worshipper, a tangible connection to the divine. These potential uses are not mutually exclusive. The same subtle force could serve the artisan, the healer, and the spiritual guide. This forces a profound shift in perspective. We often picture ancient technology as monumental, stone and bronze, visible to the eye. But the Baghdad Battery, if genuine, suggests a parallel path of subtle technology, one that worked not with levers and pulleys, but with invisible chemical reactions, a quiet science of surfaces and sensations that wove its way into the very fabric of craft, care, and ceremony. Yet for every compelling theory, there exists an equally thoughtful counterargument. The world of archaeology thrives on healthy skepticism, and the story of the Baghdad Battery is no exception. Many respected scholars look at the same clay jar and see not a primitive power cell, but a sophisticated yet entirely conventional artifact of its time. They offer alternative explanations that are far more mundane, yet deeply rooted in the known practices of the ancient world. One prominent theory suggests these were not batteries at all, but secure containers for sacred texts. In this view, the iron rod was simply a core around which a precious papyrus or parchment scroll was rolled. The copper cylinder acted as a protective sheath, guarding the delicate document from moisture and physical damage. The asphalt plug, then, was nothing more than a practical and effective sealant, keeping the contents safe and intact. It is a perfectly logical explanation that fits seamlessly into the archaeological record. We know the ancient Near East produced important religious and legal scrolls, and keeping them safe was a priority. Another possibility points to storage of a different kind. The jars could have held expensive oils, perfumes, or even medicinal compounds. The copper interior would help preserve the contents, and the asphalt seal would prevent evaporation or contamination. The corrosive residues found inside might simply be the decomposed remnants of these organic liquids after 2 millennia, not the ghost of an acidic electrolyte. There is also the chance they were part of a known chemical process, like a form of early galvanization to protect other metals, or a vessel for creating certain pigments, with the electrical effect being a completely unnoticed side event. These counterarguments serve as a crucial reminder. They highlight the immense importance of archaeological context, the precise location and association of an artifact when it is found. Without a clear, documented context showing the jars connected to wires or electroplated objects, we are left with a tantalizing possibility, but not a certainty. This skepticism warns us against the powerful temptation to project our modern frameworks, our understanding of batteries and electricity, onto an object that its makers might have viewed in a completely different light. It asks us to consider whether we are discovering ancient knowledge or inventing a past that mirrors our own technological pride. The debate between theory and practicality can only be settled in one place, the workshop. To move beyond speculation, a group of modern researchers decided to build the past with their own hands. This field, known as experimental archaeology, does not rely on dusty texts alone. It asks a simple, powerful question: can we make it work? In the 1970s, an Egyptologist named Arne Eggebrecht did exactly that. He constructed a precise replica of the Baghdad jar, filling it not with a modern chemical, but with a substance readily available in antiquity, fresh grape juice, which acts as a mild acid. His goal was not just to measure voltage, but to test one of the most compelling theories, electroplating. He took a small silver statuette and connected it to his clay battery. Over time, the gentle current drew a thin, even layer of gold from a solution onto the statue's surface. The experiment was a quiet success. It demonstrated conclusively that the technology, as envisioned, was not only possible but effective for a known ancient craft. Other independent experiments have followed, all confirming the same basic fact. A replica jar filled with vinegar or lemon juice will generate a small, steady electrical potential for weeks or even months. The voltage is modest, but it is undeniably present, a whisper of power from a 2,000-year-old design. This tangible proof is profoundly seductive. It bridges the immense gap between a strange artifact in a museum case and a functioning tool. We can hold the replica, see the bubbles form on the iron rod, and measure the flow of electrons with a modern meter. It feels, in that moment, like we have unlocked the secret. Yet here lies the crucial nuance that every good experimental archaeologist understands. Successfully replicating a function only proves possibility, not historical practice. Just because we can use the jar as a battery today does not mean that its original creator saw it that way or used it for that purpose. A modern person might use a smooth stone as a paperweight, while an ancient person might have used the same stone as a hammer or a grinding tool. The object's potential is not the same as its proven past. These brilliant experiments give us a critical piece of the puzzle. They show us the artifact's capability, transforming it from an abstract idea into a concrete, working device. They narrow the field of plausible explanations, making some theories, like electroplating, far more credible than others. But they cannot, by themselves, provide the final piece of evidence, the archaeological smoking gun. They show us what the jars could do, leaving us to wonder with even greater intensity what magnificent or mundane task they were actually built to perform. That asphalt plug is far more than ancient glue. To understand its true significance, we need to see it not as a simple stopper, but as a deliberate engineering choice. This material, known as bitumen, naturally seeped from the ground in ancient Mesopotamia, forming sticky, tar-like pools. For thousands of years, people in the region recognized its incredible utility. They used it to waterproof boats, to mortar bricks in their monumental structures, and to seal containers. It was the duct tape of the ancient world, a versatile, reliable substance drawn straight from the earth. But in the context of these jars, its application feels uniquely precise. The maker did not just seal the top with a lump of clay or a dollop of wax, both of which were readily available. They specifically selected and formed a plug of asphalt. This decision reveals a nuanced understanding of the material's dual properties. First, asphalt is supremely hydrophobic. It repels water. Pouring an acidic liquid into the jar, you would need a seal that would not degrade, swell, or permit slow evaporation over time. Asphalt provided that perfect, long-lasting barrier. Second, and this is the critical point, asphalt is an excellent electrical insulator. It does not conduct current. By using it to hold the iron rod firmly in place, the artisan guaranteed that the two metals, the iron and the copper cylinder, would remain completely isolated from each other inside the vessel. If they were to touch, they would create what we call a short circuit, instantly cancelling out any electrical potential between them. The very design prevents this. This is not a feature you need if you are merely storing a scroll or some incense. A clay seal would work just fine for that. But if your goal is to maintain a sustained chemical reaction between two dissimilar metals suspended in a liquid, this insulating, impermeable barrier becomes absolutely essential. It is the detail that transforms a curious assembly into a potentially functional apparatus. The choice of asphalt speaks a silent but powerful language. It suggests the maker was not just building a container, but was carefully managing an interaction, separating two elements to preserve a delicate and invisible state between them. It is a whisper from the past, hinting at a practical, hands-on knowledge of phenomena that we would later give a modern name, electricity. Yet the profound silence surrounding these jars is perhaps their most puzzling feature. If this was a known and utilized technology, where is everything else? Where are the wires, perhaps made of spun gold or copper thread? Where are the clear depictions in art or the written instructions passed between masters and apprentices? The Baghdad Batteries stand as a compelling but profoundly lonely piece of evidence. To understand their true place in history, we must look for echoes in other corners of the ancient world to see if they were truly an isolated anomaly or part of a forgotten pattern. Some researchers point toward the famous reliefs within the Temple of Hathor at Dendera in Egypt. Carved into the stone walls are large, bulbous objects held aloft by figures, with what appears to be a serpent coiled inside them, connected by a cable to a box. A handful of theorists have proposed these depict ancient electric lamps, with the serpent representing a glowing filament. This interpretation, however, remains highly controversial and is rejected by the vast majority of Egyptologists, who see the imagery as symbolic of spiritual concepts, like the birth of the sun god from a lotus flower. The Dendera reliefs serve more as a cautionary tale than corroboration, a reminder of how easily we can project our modern frameworks onto ancient symbolism. More concretely, there have been sporadic, less famous reports of similar terracotta jars containing metal rods from other archaeological sites in the region. These finds never gained the same notoriety as the Baghdad artifacts, often because their original context was even less clear, or they were simply catalogued as unusual storage vessels and filed away. This scattered, ambiguous evidence creates a frustrating picture. It suggests the possibility of a wider but never standardized practice, perhaps a localized craft secret that never evolved into a full-blown technology as we understand it. For every scholar who sees a pattern, a skeptic sees only isolated curiosities. This comparative silence is deafening. If the ancient world possessed practical electrical knowledge, why is there no clear progression, no refinement of the design over centuries, no mention in the meticulous records of trade or craft guilds? The absence of a supporting technological ecosystem is a powerful argument against the battery theory. It forces us to consider that these jars may represent not a lost science, but a brilliant, singular application that was never fully understood even by its creators, a fleeting spark of insight that flickered out, leaving behind only a few enigmatic clay shells for us to ponder. This silence in the ancient library is perhaps the most daunting wall for the battery theory to scale. While we can build replicas and debate designs, we are left with a profound and unsettling quiet where we most expect to find answers. The civilizations that created these jars were not silent peoples, they were meticulous record keepers. Thousands upon thousands of clay tablets from Mesopotamia survive, inscribed with the precise wedge-shaped script called cuneiform. These are not just epic poems or king lists, they are practical documents. We have tablets that are essentially ancient cookbooks for metal alloys, detailing exact recipes for bronze. We have medical texts listing symptoms and herbal remedies. We have astronomical diaries tracking the movements of planets with remarkable accuracy. The day-to-day workings of their world, from the price of barley to the dimensions of a temple, were often committed to clay. And yet, in this vast archive of written knowledge, there is not a single clear description of generating an electrical current, or of using such a current for plating metal or creating a tingling sensation. There is no word for battery, no symbol for a circuit. This textual void is a gaping hole in the narrative. It forces us to consider two very different possibilities. The first is that this was a form of lost proprietary knowledge. Imagine a guild of elite goldsmiths or temple artisans who discovered this subtle effect through generations of metalworking. They might have guarded it as a trade secret, a trick of the workshop passed orally from master to apprentice, never written down because its power lay in its exclusivity. In this scenario, the knowledge was so niche, so tightly held, that when that guild or temple faded, the secret died with its last keeper. The second, simpler possibility is that the jars served a function so ordinary, so commonplace, that no one thought to write instructions for it. You would not write a manual on how to use a clay pot to store grain. It was simply understood. If the jars were containers for sacred oils or valued scrolls, their purpose would be self-evident to any contemporary, leaving no need for explanation in the formal record. This absence pushes historians into a unique form of detective work. Without a written manual, the artifacts themselves become the primary documents. Every detail, the thickness of the copper, the composition of the asphalt, the wear patterns inside the jar, must be read like a sentence in a lost language. It is a challenging, often frustrating puzzle where the clues are physical and open to interpretation, and the final chapter of the story may simply be missing, leaving us to forever wonder what these quiet vessels were meant to say. This quiet absence of written records leads us to a much larger, more unsettling question. What if the Baghdad Battery is not just a misunderstood artifact, but a key to a different way of seeing history itself? If we accept that these jars represent intentional knowledge of electricity, we are forced to abandon a comfortable story, the linear narrative of human progress. We are taught that science and technology move in one direction forward, with each generation building upon the last in an unbroken chain of discovery. But these clay vessels suggest a different rhythm, a cycle. They whisper that profound insights can be found, then forgotten, buried by time, conflict, or simply a shift in cultural priorities, only to be found again centuries later by a new civilization that believes it is the first to see the light. This places the ancient Mesopotamian artisan in a startling new role. We often revere them as philosophers who pondered the stars, or as engineers who built ziggurats that touched the sky. But the battery hints at a third identity, the experimental tinkerer. This was not someone merely applying inherited techniques, but a curious mind in a workshop, combining common materials in uncommon ways, observing a faint tingle or a subtle plating effect, and then refining a design to harness it. This aligns with a broader truth we see throughout history, the phenomenon of multiple, independent discovery. Think of calculus developed separately by Newton and Leibniz. Or the theory of evolution, with Wallace arriving at similar conclusions as Darwin. Great ideas often emerge when the cultural and intellectual conditions are ripe, suggesting that the spark of discovery can ignite in different times and places. The possibility of ancient electricity is a profound lesson in humility. It asks us to reconsider our assumption of technological supremacy. Our modern world runs on a grid of unimaginable complexity, yet its foundational principle, the chemical generation of current, may have been quietly understood 2,000 years ago. This realization should not diminish our achievements, but rather deepen our respect for the ingenuity of those who came before. It opens a door. If we have been wrong about this one jar, what else might we have missed? It encourages us to look at other so-called out-of-place artifacts, those objects that seem too advanced for their time, not with immediate skepticism, but with fresh, open eyes, ready to listen to the subtle stories they might tell about the winding, non-linear path of human innovation. That winding path of human innovation often leads us into a strange and crowded modern marketplace of ideas. The Baghdad Battery has long since escaped the quiet halls of academia, becoming a celebrated star in the world of alternative history and popular entertainment. You can find it featured in best-selling books, dramatic television documentaries, and especially in series like Ancient Aliens, where it is often presented as definitive proof of lost advanced technology or even extraterrestrial influence. This exposure has woven a powerful modern mythos around these simple clay jars, a narrative that is thrilling, expansive, and frequently amplifies the claims far beyond what the physical evidence can support. This popular fascination is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it is incredibly valuable. It brings public attention to archaeological mysteries that might otherwise gather dust in specialist journals. It sparks curiosity in history, inspires new generations to ask questions, and keeps the conversation about our past vibrant and alive. The very fact that we are discussing this today is a testament to that captivating power. Yet on the other hand, this sensationalized treatment can create a distorted picture. It often sidelines the meticulous, painstaking, and sometimes frustratingly slow work of professional archaeologists. The nuanced debate between a storage jar and a battery gets compressed into a dramatic reveal of forbidden knowledge. The careful language of maybe and possibly hardens into the certainty of proof. Navigating this landscape as an curious viewer requires a subtle skill, the ability to hold two ideas in your mind at once. You can absolutely embrace the wonder and the compelling mystery of the artifact. You can let your imagination run with the possibilities of ancient electroplating workshops or tingling temple rituals. But simultaneously, it is crucial to recognize the dividing line between that imaginative exploration and the grounded discipline of historical inquiry. The most responsible approach celebrates the artifact's power to captivate us, while still respectfully adhering to the scholarly rigor that asks the harder, less glamorous questions. It means enjoying the thrilling what-if while remembering to also ask, what is the actual evidence? This balance allows the mystery to inspire us without allowing myth to completely overwrite the fragile, fragmentary story told by the clay itself. But to move beyond the realm of theory, we need to ask what the objects themselves might still be hiding. Modern science possesses tools that could, in theory, peer into the jar's history with unprecedented clarity. Techniques like X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy could analyze the exact composition of the copper and iron without so much as touching them, searching for subtle alloy differences or impurities that might hint at a specialized metallurgical recipe. High-resolution scans could map the interior surfaces for microscopic wear patterns, the kind that repeated electrical activity might leave behind, a faint etching from a 2,000-year-old current. Even the crusty residues inside could be broken down molecule by molecule through mass spectrometry, potentially identifying the precise organic compound that once filled the vessel, confirming whether it was an acidic agent like vinegar or something more mundane like a decomposed oil. The potential for new discovery is immense, yet here we encounter a practical and respectful limitation. The original artifacts are priceless and incredibly fragile. Subjecting them to a battery of modern tests, even non-invasive ones, carries risks of damage or degradation that cultural heritage institutions are rightfully hesitant to take. So while we can dream of the definitive answers such an analysis might provide, the comprehensive study has yet to be done. This leaves the physical evidence in a state of partial interpretation. We have the broad strokes from early examinations, but not the fine, forensic detail that could tip the scales decisively toward one explanation or another. This scientific pause is not a failure, it is an acknowledgement of the value of these rare objects. It means the door is still open. The jars hold their secret close, protected by their own antiquity and our modern duty to preserve them. Until the day comes when technology advances enough to make such examination utterly risk-free, or a compelling case for limited testing is agreed upon, the most powerful clues remain locked within the clay and metal, waiting for a future generation of researchers to finally listen to their full story. A single jar could never light a lamp or power a tool. This is the practical reality that anchors the entire mystery back to the ground. The electrical output from one of these vessels, as measured by modern replicas, is undeniably modest, a faint whisper of power. We are talking about a voltage likely less than that of a modern watch battery, and a current so gentle you would barely feel the tingle on your fingertips. For any application requiring real energy like illumination or mechanical motion, a single cell is essentially useless. This is not a matter of debate, it is a simple fact of physics and chemistry. To move from a curious effect to a practical technology, an ancient user would have needed to connect multiple jars together. Linking them in a chain, what we call a series connection, would have multiplied the voltage. Connecting them side by side in parallel would have increased the available current. Only through such a battery, in the true sense of the word, could they have achieved a useful and noticeable output for tasks like consistent electroplating. And here lies the most glaring absence in the archaeological record. We have the jars, but we have none of the connective tissue. No spools of fine wire, no metal strips with corrosion patterns suggesting they linked one vessel to another, no ceramic troughs designed to hold multiple cells in a fixed array. Not a single artifact has been found that clearly demonstrates the knowledge or the intent to scale this effect up. For skeptics, this silence is deafening and definitive. They argue that if this was an understood and applied technology, its practitioners would have inevitably sought to improve it, to make it more powerful and reliable. We would expect to find evidence of that evolution, perhaps larger jars, different metal pairings, or those very connection systems. The fact that we only ever find these isolated, low-power curiosities suggests to many that they were never part of a technological system at all. They remained, at best, a localized and poorly understood phenomenon, a spark that never caught fire, leaving behind only these enigmatic clay shells as a monument to a fascinating but functionally limited dead end. Perhaps the most profound way to understand these jars is to stop seeing them through our own eyes. We are children of the scientific revolution, conditioned to seek function and utility. But the ancient mind often operated in a different register, one where the boundary between the physical and the spiritual was porous and alive. Beyond any workshop application, we must consider a world where a faint, invisible force would not be seen as a tool, but as a miracle. A gentle, persistent tingle on the skin, a mysterious vibration transmitted through a metal statue, the very presence of an unseen energy. These experiences would have been deeply powerful in a ritual context. In the dim, incense-filled chambers of a temple, a priest could have used such a device to create a moment of profound awe. A worshipper, instructed to touch a sacred idol, might feel a strange, humming vitality coursing from the metal, a direct and tangible communication from the divine. This would not be a trick but a sacrament, a ceremonial practice that made the unseen world momentarily perceptible. The materials chosen for the jar support this symbolic reading. Each component could have represented a fundamental element of the cosmos. The iron rod drawn from the earth might symbolize strength or the masculine principle. The copper cylinder, associated with the goddess Ishtar and the planet Venus in Mesopotamian culture, could represent beauty, fertility, or the heavens. The clay jar itself was the body of the earth formed from primordial mud. The asphalt plug, a sticky substance welling up from deep underground, often had associations with the underworld or preservation. Assembled, this vessel wasn't just a collection of parts, it was a microcosm, a miniature universe engineered to manifest a hidden life force. From this perspective, the intent shifts dramatically. The goal was not to generate amperes or plate gold. The goal was to create an experience, to bridge the gap between the human and the divine through a controlled, mysterious phenomenon. The careful insulation, the specific metals, the sealed vessel, all of this points to a deep, ritual precision, a knowledge not of electrical engineering, but of symbolic correspondence and sacred theater. This interpretation liberates the artifact from our modern need for technological progress. It allows the jar to be exactly what it was, a perfect and complete invention for its own time and place, serving a purpose we can only begin to glimpse, one where science, magic, and devotion were not separate paths, but different words for the same profound mystery. Wilhelm König saw what others had overlooked. In the quiet of the museum, surrounded by relics of daily life, his eyes were drawn to the specific arrangement of metal and asphalt within those clay jars. His proposal that they were ancient batteries was not born from a laboratory, but from a conservator's intimate knowledge of materials. He was, by training, a painter and an artifact restorer, not a physicist or a formally trained archaeologist. This background became the central pivot of the entire debate. To his critics, it was a fatal flaw. How could a man without advanced scientific credentials dare to reinterpret such artifacts? They dismissed his electrical hypothesis as the fanciful speculation of an amateur, an imaginative leap unsupported by rigorous proof. Yet this very perspective was also his greatest strength. A conservator does not just catalogue objects, they understand their physicality, the way different substances age and interact. König looked at the jar and saw the intentionality of its construction, the deliberate choice of an insulating sealant, the careful isolation of two dissimilar metals. He approached it not as a text to be translated, but as a crafted object with a purpose. His legacy, therefore, is beautifully contradictory. He is the outsider whose unconventional thinking challenged a settled historical narrative, forcing experts to re-examine artifacts they thought they understood. Whether his specific interpretation is ever fully validated, his true contribution was a shift in perception. By asking a radical question, he transformed these humble jars from forgotten pottery into permanent puzzles. He ensured they would forever sit at the crossroads of history and mystery, a testament to the power of looking at the ancient world with fresh and sometimes interdisciplinary eyes. Metalworkers in ancient Mesopotamia understood their materials with an intimacy we can scarcely imagine. Their world was one of fire and chemistry, where the subtle behaviors of metals were not abstract principles, but the direct results of hands-on generational experimentation. To gauge whether an electrical discovery was possible, we should not look for a textbook, but for the fingerprints of that practical knowledge in other, well-documented crafts. These artisans were brilliant alloyers, mixing copper and tin to create bronze of specific hardness, or adding precise amounts of other elements to alter color and workability. In this constant physical dialogue with metal, they could not have helped but observe some fundamental properties. They knew which metals conducted heat quickly to the hand and which felt cool. They understood malleability, durability, and how different surfaces reacted to various polishing techniques. This embodied knowledge almost certainly included a rudimentary, if unnamed, awareness of conductivity, the simple fact that some substances readily transmit a force or sensation while others do not. A goldsmith feeling a shock from handling two different metals in a damp workshop might not have called it electricity, but he would have recognized the distinct, tingling effect as a property of those specific materials in combination. This experiential understanding extends directly into one of the most cited uses for the battery, electroplating. We know for a fact that these cultures practiced fire gilding, a process using mercury that was dangerous and toxic. But consider the workshop of a master gilder. He routinely used chemical baths, solutions of acids and salts, to clean metals or prepare surfaces. It is entirely plausible that during this work, an accidental discovery occurred. Imagine a silver ring, left sitting in a vessel containing a trace of gold and an acidic agent, perhaps resting against a piece of copper or iron. Returning later, the artisan might have noticed a faint, inexplicable shimmer of gold had transferred to the ring's surface. He would not have understood the electron exchange, but he would have seen the result, a new, easier, and less dangerous method for applying a golden finish. From there, it becomes a short, logical step to intentionally recreate the conditions that produce that magical effect. The clay jar battery, then, wouldn't be a theoretical invention, but a pragmatic tool born from this very observation, a stable, repeatable apparatus designed to control and harness a mysterious chemical reaction they had already witnessed. Beyond the workshop, we find evidence of an ancient familiarity with electricity in a far more organic form. In other contemporary cultures, particularly in Egypt and Greece, there are clear historical accounts of using live electric fish for therapeutic purposes. The Nile catfish and the Mediterranean torpedo ray can deliver a powerful, numbing shock. Ancient medical texts describe physicians deliberately placing patients on these fish or applying them to specific areas of the body to relieve chronic pain, headaches, or even gout. This was a documented, if not fully understood, application of bioelectricity. It proves that ancient peoples were not only aware of this invisible, shocking force in nature, but they had also begun to explore its practical effects on the human body. They categorized it as a natural phenomenon with medicinal properties. When you step back and view these threads together, a compelling picture emerges. We have metalworkers with a deep, tactile knowledge of conductive materials. We have goldsmiths who might have stumbled upon electrochemical plating in their vats. And we have healers in neighboring cultures harnessing the power of electric creatures. None of this constitutes a unified science of electricity with theories and laws. Instead, it paints a portrait of a scattered, experiential understanding. Different people in different trades were encountering various facets of the same fundamental force in a metal shop, in a medicine chest, and in the river. This environment is crucial. It means the intellectual and practical soil was fertile. The function of the Baghdad Battery no longer needs to be imagined as a bolt from the blue, a concept with no precedent. It becomes a perfectly plausible, even likely, innovation. A curious mind, perhaps an artisan who was also a priest or a healer, could have connected these disparate dots. They might have sought to replicate the soothing tingle of the electric fish with metals and acids, or to refine the accidental gliding they saw in their workshop into a reliable technique. The jar, then, stands not as an isolated miracle, but as a potential synthesis, a physical bridge between these parallel realms of craft, healing, and natural observation. It represents a moment of applied genius where scattered experiences were gathered and crystallized into a single, elegant, and enduring design. The story of these jars is not just written in clay and copper, but also in loss. The original Baghdad Batteries, like countless other irreplaceable artifacts, were caught in the devastating looting of the Iraq Museum in 2003. In the chaos, some were damaged, others were stolen, and their precise whereabouts today remain uncertain, a shadow over the entire investigation. This reality introduces a profound and painful conservation dilemma. These objects are not just clues to a mystery, they are fragile, finite pieces of our shared human heritage. Every touch, every move risks further degradation. How do we balance the urgent need to preserve them with the scientific desire to analyze them with tools that did not exist when they were first discovered? The question is deeply ethical. Do we lock them away in climate-controlled darkness to save them for future generations who may have better, non-invasive technology? Or do we risk a small amount of damage now in the hope of finally answering the questions that have lingered for nearly a century? This physical vulnerability is a powerful metaphor. The evidence that could rewrite a chapter of human ingenuity is as delicate as the fired clay that holds it. The narrative itself is fragile, susceptible to the erosions of time, conflict, and simple neglect. Each crack in the jar, each missing fragment, is a lost word in a story we are desperately trying to read. This dilemma forces us to confront a humbling truth. Sometimes preserving the mystery is the only way to preserve the artifact. The silence we grapple with is not just an absence of ancient records, but a consequence of modern turmoil. It means the final, definitive tests that could settle the debate may never be possible, leaving the jars suspended forever between history and legend, their greatest secret safeguarded by their own enduring fragility. A missing piece of the puzzle lies not in the jar itself, but in the soil that once surrounded it. In archaeology, context is everything. An object's true story is told by its companions, its resting place, and the layer of earth from which it was carefully lifted. For the Baghdad Batteries, this is where the trail grows frustratingly faint. Wilhelm König's original records, while invaluable, lack the meticulous detail demanded by contemporary archaeology. We know they were reportedly found near Baghdad, in a region rich with history, but the precise circumstances of their discovery remain clouded. Were they uncovered in the corner of an artisan's workshop, nestled among crucibles and metal filings? Were they placed with reverence in a temple crypt alongside ritual objects? Or were they simply part of a domestic storage room in an ordinary home? Each of these settings would whisper a completely different narrative about the jar's purpose. The objects found alongside them would be the key characters in that story. The discovery of small metal tools, wire fragments, or partially gilded items would powerfully support the electroplating workshop theory. Finding them with papyrus scrolls or stelae would strongly indicate a use for safeguarding documents. If they were accompanied by ceremonial vessels or figurines, the case for a ritual function would become far more compelling. This absence of ironclad context is the single greatest obstacle to moving from fascinating speculation to settled historical fact. Without that grounded, physical story written in the earth, the jars float in a kind of interpretive limbo. They are detached from the daily life that gave them meaning, leaving modern researchers to reconstruct a world around them based on possibility rather than proven association. This fundamental gap forces a humble acknowledgement. Sometimes the most important part of an ancient artifact is the empty space where it once sat, a silent void that holds the answers we may never fully recover. This tension between a brilliant idea and hard proof defines a core principle of historical science. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. It is a rule that acts as a gatekeeper for our understanding of the past, ensuring that what enters the history books is built on a foundation of facts, not just fascinating stories. For the theory that the Baghdad jars were batteries to move from a compelling what-if to a settled chapter in our textbooks, the evidence would need to be overwhelming. We would hope to find a clear depiction on a temple wall, an artisan shown connecting wires between these vessels. We would need a cuneiform tablet describing the tingling power of the copper and iron vessel. Most convincingly, archaeologists would need to uncover a complete set of jars still physically linked by metal strips or wires, perhaps alongside a small, electroplated object, forming an undeniable archaeological circuit. That is the standard. As of now, the evidence for the battery, while thought-provoking, remains circumstantial and analogical. We have an object whose design suggests a function. We have modern experiments that prove that function is possible, but we lack the direct contextual clues that tie it all together in an ancient setting. This rigorous burden of proof is not meant to dismiss curiosity. It is a necessary shield. It protects the field from being swept away by every appealing speculation, ensuring that the story of humanity is reconstructed with care and integrity. Yet this same principle has a double edge. In its zeal to guard against falsehoods, it can sometimes become a wall that keeps out truly revolutionary ideas, especially those that challenge our established narratives. The history of science is littered with concepts initially ridiculed for lack of evidence, only to be vindicated decades or centuries later. The Baghdad Battery sits precisely on this knife edge. It challenges the historian to perform a delicate balancing act, to hold a genuinely open mind about a radical possibility, while simultaneously demanding the most robust evidence before changing the accepted story. This is not a flaw in the process, it is the process itself. This very tension, this respectful struggle between imagination and verification, is what drives genuine progress. It forces us to look harder, to question our assumptions, and to remember that sometimes the most important discoveries begin not with a shout of proof, but with a quiet, persistent question that refuses to go away. So we find ourselves at a philosophical crossroads, armed with two very different tools for cutting through this mystery. On one hand, we have the trusted principle of Occam's razor. This idea, attributed to a 14th century logician, advises that when faced with competing explanations, the one requiring the fewest new assumptions is usually correct. It is a principle of elegant simplicity, a safeguard against weaving elaborate stories where a straightforward one will do. Applied to our clay jars, Occam's razor points firmly toward the mundane. They are storage vessels, beautifully preserved examples of ancient container technology. The iron rod held a scroll, the copper cylinder protected it, the asphalt kept it dry. This explanation requires no leap, no invocation of forgotten science. It fits perfectly within the well-documented material culture of the time. To suggest they are batteries, we must assume an entire layer of lost knowledge, a specialized craft that left no other clear trace. For many historians, the choice is clear. The simplest answer is almost certainly the true one. Yet history is not always simple. Progress often comes from the very act of questioning the obvious, from daring to consider the disruptive possibility that upends everything we thought we knew. This is the spirit of revolutionary thinking. It argues that clinging too tightly to simplicity can blind us to genuine anomalies, to those rare artifacts that truly do not fit the established pattern. It was revolutionary thinking that allowed Wilhelm König to see a battery where others saw a pot. It is this same spirit that drives modern experimenters to test the boundaries of what we believe was possible. If we only ever apply Occam's razor, we risk smoothing over the rough, fascinating edges of history, forcing every puzzling piece into a pre-existing box. The design of the jars themselves provides the friction that keeps the battery theory alive. The specific choice of an insulating asphalt plug, the pairing of two dissimilar metals, the evidence of an acidic agent, these are not random features for a scroll jar. They align with eerie precision with the requirements for generating a current. It is a fit that is hard to dismiss as mere coincidence. Perhaps, then, we are asking the wrong question by demanding a single, definitive answer. The real truth of these objects may exist not in a binary choice, but in a gray area of human experience, a space where function and discovery overlap. Consider this possibility. The jars were indeed manufactured as high-quality storage containers for valuable scrolls or sacred oils. That was their primary, intended purpose. But in the course of their use, an observant individual might have noticed something strange. Perhaps a jar was refilled with a different, acidic liquid by mistake. Maybe a priest, while handling the metal rod after the contents had fermented, felt a faint, surprising tingle. In that moment, the object's secondary, hidden property revealed itself. This accidental discovery could have been noted, shared, and even occasionally exploited. A goldsmith, hearing of the effect, might have borrowed the concept to try a new plating method. A healer might have used the tingling sensation in a ceremonial practice. This would not constitute a formal, widespread technology of electricity. It would be a localized, intermittent practice, a clever reuse of a common object for an uncommon purpose. The knowledge would be fragile, passed along as a workshop secret or a temple mystery, easily lost when that specific artisan or priest was no longer there to teach it. This interpretation satisfies both our philosophical tools. It honors the simple, original function of the jar as a container, while also making room for the revolutionary spark of observed and repurposed phenomenon. It allows the artifact to be both ordinary and extraordinary, a testament to the endless human capacity to find wonder and utility in the most unexpected places. The true nature of these jars cannot be unlocked by a single key. To solve a puzzle this old and this intricate, we must gather a full set of tools, each from a different intellectual workshop. This is the seventh and perhaps most vital principle in our investigation, the necessity of interdisciplinary synthesis. no one field holds the complete answer. Archaeology provides the artifact itself, the physical object with its shape, composition, and the faint clues of its burial. Chemistry steps in to explain the possible reactions inside it, the dance between the acidic electrolyte and the two dissimilar metals. Physics models the output, calculating the voltage and current that such a dance could produce. And history offers the essential cultural framework, the tapestry of daily life, ritual, and innovation into which the object must be woven. When these disciplines work in isolation, they produce only fragments of the story. An archaeologist might catalogue the jar as a unique storage vessel. A chemist might confirm it could generate a current. A physicist might deem that current too weak to be useful. A historian might find no written record of its purpose. Each perspective on its own leads to a dead end or a partial truth. But when synthesized, when these fragments are brought together and allowed to speak to one another, a far richer and more coherent picture begins to emerge. This is exactly what we see in the modern investigation of the Baghdad Battery. Engineers and experimental archaeologists build working replicas, testing the physical claims. At the same time, historians and linguists scour ancient texts and comparative artifacts, searching for any cultural echo. Metallurgists analyze the composition of the metals, while conservators study the degradation patterns of the asphalt. The mystery forces these experts to talk to each other, to translate their specialized knowledge into a common language focused on a single, enigmatic goal. This collaborative approach is not just helpful for this one artifact, it is a fundamental lesson for investigating any historical mystery. It asks us to break down the academic silos that can sometimes wall off understanding. The deepest insights into our past often live in the spaces between disciplines, in the connections that are only visible when we look from multiple angles at once. In this light, the Baghdad Battery transcends its own mystery. It becomes a powerful case study in collaborative inquiry. It is a teacher showing us that to understand the complex minds of our ancestors, we must be willing to think in a similarly connected way, blending the rigor of science with the nuance of human culture. The final answer may still be out of reach, but the method for seeking it is now beautifully clear. The pursuit of this mystery is far from over, its path illuminated by new questions rather than settled answers. Where does the investigation go from here? The most decisive breakthrough could come from the ground itself. Imagine a future archaeological dig uncovering a similar terracotta jar, but this time in a perfectly clear, undisturbed context. Perhaps it is found resting in a stone-lined niche alongside a small, intricately gilded pendant and a coil of fine copper wire. Or maybe it is part of a larger toolkit containing small metal brushes and vessels with acidic residues. Such a discovery, linking the object directly to the tools of a specific craft, would be a game-changer, transforming a compelling theory into a tangible chapter of ancient life. Beyond new excavations, our ability to interrogate the artifacts we already have is advancing rapidly. Portable, non-destructive scanning technology is evolving every year. Future devices may allow researchers to perform incredibly detailed chemical and structural analyses on the original jars without ever touching them, mapping the interior surfaces for microscopic wear patterns or identifying the exact organic signature of the 2,000-year-old residue with absolute certainty. This could finally tell us definitively what substance once filled these vessels. Another frontier lies in the written records we already possess. A systematic, interdisciplinary review of known Mesopotamian texts on chemistry, metallurgy, and temple rituals might reveal overlooked clues. A passing description of a tingling statue, a recipe for a gilding bath that doesn't use mercury, or even a metaphorical reference to a vessel that holds a hidden spirit could all be pieces of a puzzle we are only now learning how to read. The mystery endures precisely because the questions it asks are so fundamentally human. Did they know? If so, how much did they truly understand? Were they masters of a subtle technology, or were they witnesses to a beautiful accident they could only explain as magic? The search for these answers does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It refines our methods, pushes the boundaries of our technology, and reminds us that the past is not a closed book, but an ongoing conversation. It is this conversation, this relentless drive to understand the ingenuity of those who came before us, that ensures these quiet clay jars will continue to captivate scholars and dreamers alike for generations to come. These quiet vessels from the sands of Iraq leave us with a choice, but perhaps that is their true purpose. We are left holding two competing truths, each supported by its own elegant logic. On one hand, we have a design that aligns with uncanny precision to the principles of electrochemistry, a whisper of forgotten knowledge that challenges our linear view of progress. On the other, we have the sobering silence of the archaeological record, the absence of wires, manuals, or scaled-up systems that would confirm a widespread technology. Both interpretations are valid, yet both feel incomplete on their own. The enduring power of the Baghdad Battery lies not in proving one side definitively right, but in the profound conversation it forces us to have across centuries. It compels the engineer to respect the historian's context and the historian to acknowledge the physicist's data. This artifact is a bridge, not a battleground. It connects our modern, analytical minds with the ancient, experiential world of the artisan and the priest. In the end, whether they were used to plate a golden amulet or protect a sacred text, these jars achieved something remarkable. They captured a moment of human observation, a flash of curiosity frozen in clay and copper. They remind us that history is not a list of facts, but a collection of fragments we are always piecing together, guided by both evidence and wonder. That faint tingle of possibility they generate is far more potent than any ancient current. It is the spark that keeps us looking, questioning, and marveling at the ingenious, mysterious world that came before our own. If this journey into the shadows of history has ignited your own curiosity, we would love to hear your perspective. Do you believe these were ancient batteries, or is there another explanation that resonates with you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For more explorations into the lost corners of our past, subscribe and join us as we continue to question the stories we think we know.